Robert Redford was one of the greatest names in modern Hollywood. The 89-year-old actor died early this morning at his home in Utah. That's according to his publicist.
Robert Redford, Hollywood's golden star of yesteryear, has passed away, leaving an irreplaceable void in the hearts of friends and cinema lovers. His funeral became a somber milestone where colleagues bowed their heads in memory of a legend. Yet hidden behind that solemnity is a shocking secret. Before drawing his last breath, Redford left behind a blacklist of faces he adamantly did not want to see at his funeral. The list included those who had brazenly stolen his credit and tried to derail his career, a blonde heartthrob consumed by lust and partying, and even a man considered a serial plagiarist who made a habit of public humiliation. So, ultimately, who did Redford scratch off the list for the final farewell moment of his life? And what did they do to turn professional camaraderie into an unforgivable feud? 1. Dustin Hoffman, the credit thief who turned every conversation into agony. Dustin Hoffman was the first name on Robert Redford's hate list. They once created All the President's Men, together a cinematic masterpiece. But behind the glory was a decaying relationship, from suspicion and jealousy to utter hatred, turning the perfect pair into people who could never talk to each other for more than 30 seconds. The seeds of the feud were planted with the movie The Graduate, 1967. The lead role of Benjamin Braddock was initially intended for Robert Redford, but he was rejected for being too handsome. The role then went to Dustin Hoffman, who became a superstar overnight. While Hoffman constantly boasted about his successes at press conferences, Redford only responded with a silent, contemptuous smile. What deepened the conflict was the fact that Hoffman almost always tried to undermine Redford, from disparaging comments to intentionally sabotaging his film projects. By 1976, when they faced each other on the set of All the President's Men, the relationship officially exploded. At this time, Redford was the producer, and the retaliation officially began. He intervened deeply in everything, editing the script, cutting dialogue, and demanding dozens of retakes to achieve the perfection he set for himself. Hoffman, a method actor who preferred freedom and spontaneity, was driven mad by the control. The tension climaxed during one scene. When Redford suddenly demanded a 40th take, Hoffman threw the script to the floor, yelling, "This isn't your own movie, you dictator!" Minutes later, the two nearly came to blows backstage had director Alan Pakula not intervened. Pakula had to simultaneously separate them and shout, "Enough! Do you two want to go to the police station? Shut up, both of you!" Although the incident was suppressed from that moment, Redford and Hoffman officially became eternal rivals. The conflict didn't stop. After the film won 4 Oscars, the press began to compare who was the true soul of the film. Redford asserted that without his production, All the President's Men might not have existed. Hoffman hinted, "Without me, people would only see a handsome Redford." Redford, who greatly valued his reputation, viewed that as a blatant denial of his contribution. And from then on, he never collaborated with Hoffman again. At events, the two often had backstage altercations. It culminated at the Golden Globe Awards when Redford walked into the room and Hoffman immediately played a dirty trick by tripping him. In his final days, Redford didn't hesitate to call Hoffman the most hateful person in his life. And Hoffman, when asked about Redford, replied venomously, "You'd be crazy to be friends with that blonde guy." Therefore, Dustin Hoffman naturally became the first name who would never attend Redford's funeral. Because if death is the final moment to cleanse hatred between them, that hatred had burrowed so deep that there was no room for forgiveness. Not only that, Hollywood is a place prone to ingratitude. And bitterly, Redford experienced that from the very person he once saw as his successor, who even explicitly stated he would never attend his funeral. 2. Brad Pitt, From Protégé to Ungrateful Arrogant Man. In 1992, when Robert Redford chose Brad Pitt for the lead role in A River Runs Through It All of Hollywood, considered it an act of fostering an unknown actor. However, this mentor-protégé relationship quickly fell apart due to Pitt's ingratitude and insolence. Just a few years later, in an interview with Vanity Fair, Pitt coldly declared, "I made a name for myself not thanks to anyone." The media fiercely condemned him for his lack of tact. When a reporter referred to Redford as his mentor, he immediately cut them off. "Don't tie me to anyone. I don't need a godfather." Pitt's indiscipline and insolent temperament further annoyed Redford. The more famous he became, the more Pitt was late, seriously affecting the shooting schedule. Once in Montana, the film crew had to wait for Pitt for nearly 3 hours. When he walked onto the set reeking of alcohol, Redford immediately stood up and pointed right at him, yelling, "Be early next time or get the hell out of here." The entire set fell silent, but Pitt just smirked, then turned his back and walked away. Pitt also displayed an aggressive attitude toward the press. Several times when asked about his private life, he cut off the question, swatted the microphone away, and left, leaving the interviewer embarrassed. Pitt once nearly physically attacked a reporter for accidentally asking about his love life, causing such chaos that the studio head had to intervene. The conflict compounded as Pitt indulged in alcohol, cigarettes, and confessed to using marijuana to escape reality. The Western media repeatedly used the phrase "Brad Pitt," the guy who likes to interrupt every interview. Redford considered mentoring Brad Pitt the biggest mistake of his life. He even declared, "I wouldn't want to see him even if I was dead." When Brad heard this, he simply replied, "Fine, if that's what he wants." For these reasons, Brad Pitt was one of the names Redford absolutely did not want to see at his funeral. Because for Redford, Pitt was not just a traitor, but a spiritual child corrupted by the spotlight. After the unpleasant colleague, he continued to clash with the noisy young star to the point of banning him from his funeral. 3. Leonardo DiCaprio, fleeting romances and the hypocrisy behind the glamour. In the public eye, Leonardo DiCaprio is Hollywood's worthy successor, charming, talented, and using his fame to advocate for global issues. But to Robert Redford, Leo was a hypocritical man and the embodiment of a licentious lifestyle. Redford admitted he couldn't stand DiCaprio's romantic life. Numerous times at Cannes, Redford was forced to witness DiCaprio clinging to and passionately kissing young models barely old enough to be his granddaughter right in front of dozens of guests. The height of it came during one dinner where Redford saw Leo brazenly allow a woman to sit on his lap, kissing fiercely at the dinner table, and leaving directors wide-eyed at the dramatics. When he reached 50 but still only dated women under 25, DiCaprio was dubbed the king who refuses to age. At one film conference, when a reporter asked about DiCaprio, Redford couldn't help but comment, "What can I say? I just feel eye strain." Beyond romance, DiCaprio's partying habit also earned Redford's contempt. For a time, DiCaprio lived wildly smoking, staying up all night on yachts, neglecting his fitness, and letting his body get out of shape. Redford was shocked to see Leo shirtless, dancing wildly to loud music with dozens of girls on the deck. In Redford's eyes, this was not free-spirited liberty, but an obscene sight, a total contrast to the elegant leading man Hollywood once praised. But what infuriated Redford the most was Leo's supposed environmental protection. On stage, he passionately called for saving the earth and conserving energy. But in real life, he traveled on private jets and super yachts, massive carbon emitters, even exploiting the cause to burnish his image. To Redford, Leo was the incarnation of a decaying Hollywood. where fame, lust, and falsehood overshadowed all genuine artistic values. But Hollywood was never short of two-faced individuals. After The Dissolute Ones, Redford also famously clashed with another actor. 4. Jeff Bridges. So unsanitary and smelly that colleagues were terrified. In Hollywood, few people annoyed Redford to the point of near fainting like Jeff Bridges. If Redford was obsessed with cleanliness, Bridges was the embodiment of sloppiness, poor hygiene even being nicknamed the filthiest person on set by many. Bridges frequently wore wrinkled clothes, sometimes wearing the same old shirt repeatedly until it was ragged. A co-star once laughed bitterly. Jeff walked out of the makeup room looking exactly the same as when he arrived on set. To Redford, who considered tidiness the minimal respect for the profession, that sight was nothing short of an insult. During a cast meeting, Redford suddenly grimaced, covering his nose tightly. A few seconds later, he had to leave the meeting because he couldn't stand the thick, pervasive odor from Bridges' greasy hair. Redford later confessed to his assistant, "I nearly fainted from that smell." The backstage rumors fueled Redford's hatred. Colleagues revealed that Bridges could go a week without showering or shaving, leaving his hair and beard messy and his clothes reeking of heavy sweat. Redford recounted with a look of horror, "We had to spray perfume all over the set to neutralize the smell." Bridges once claimed he doesn't care about appearance. This personality helped him perfectly embody the role of the dude in The Big Lebowski, but it frustrated many directors due to his excessive nonchalance on set. When Redford was in high concentration for a shoot, Bridges would burst into laughter and talk about his one-night stands ruining the take and forcing the entire crew to restart. Jeff Bridges was also disliked for his promiscuous past. He publicly admitted to substance addiction. This habit caused many directors to avoid him, fearing it would affect the filming schedule. For Redford, who always regarded cinema as a sacred career, Bridges was nothing short of a waster of talent, only indulging his base instincts. For these reasons, Jeff Bridges was one of the names Redford absolutely did not want at his funeral. To Redford, Bridges' presence would be a disgrace cast upon his final resting place. However, the obsession with personal hygiene and the debauched lifestyle were only part of the list of things Redford hated. At the other extreme, someone drove him mad because his mouth never knew when to stop. 5. Tom Hanks, the master of idea theft and the colleague humiliator. In his illustrious career, Robert Redford rarely publicly demeaned younger actors, but Tom Hanks was the exception. As early as the late 1980s, when the press eagerly called Hanks the new Redford of Hollywood, Redford dismissed it as a stupid comparison. He once bluntly remarked backstage at Sundance, "He's living off my shadow." The conflict violently erupted in 2007. Redford had spent nearly a decade nurturing a project about Afghanistan, even hanging a war map in his Utah office. But then tragedy struck. One of his screenwriters was a close friend of Tom Hanks. Just a few months later, Hanks unexpectedly announced Charlie Wilson's War, a project that exploited the exact theme Redford had been developing for years. Redford was so shocked he suffered a heart attack on the spot and was taken to the hospital. When the film premiered, it was a box office hit and hailed as a Hollywood masterpiece. Redford called Hanks and yelled, "This is theft! You are shameless!" However, the idea plagiarism did not happen only once. In 2003, at a meeting in Beverly Hills, Redford enthusiastically discussed his dream of making a TV series exposing powerful relationships. A year later, Hanks teamed up with Aaron Sorkin to develop The Newsroom. Redford was so enraged that he tore up his own script draft, throwing it into the fireplace at his Utah villa. Hanks didn't just cause Redford resentment over ideas. His attitude on set also exposed his irascible, contemptuous nature. In a scene in Los Angeles when Redford offered a note on the dialogue rhythm, Hanks threw the script straight at the wallpaper, flying everywhere. He walked out, leaving the entire crew stunned, and the director had to order an emergency break. A production assistant later recalled, "I've never seen Redford so pale. He just silently gathered the scattered script pages and walked away without a word." The climax came in 2012 at a film conference in New York. Redford called for cinema to remain neutral between factions. Hanks, sitting in the front row, suddenly stood up and snatched the microphone, declaring grandly, "Artists must choose sides, otherwise you're nothing but cowards." The audience buzzed, then burst into laughter, leaving Redford, the one whose mic was snatched, feeling utterly humiliated. To Redford, Hanks was not just arrogant, but an idea thief and a public humiliator, someone he absolutely did not want to see, even in death. If ingratitude left Redford with bitterness, there was another person who terrified him simply because of a sloppy lifestyle no one could tolerate. 6. Robert De Niro, the swearer who cursed unreservedly. In the industry, Robert Redford and Robert De Niro were once ranked side by side, two legends of the same caliber, two pillars of American cinema. But that respect soon turned into distance as Redford became De Niro's frequent victim. De Niro was notorious for his quick temper, especially in interviews. He once directly shouted at a reporter for a question he deemed disrespectful. Once at Cannes, even with the cameras still rolling, De Niro mumbled public curses in front of over 100 actors and became the center of the hall. Sitting in the back row, Redford felt intensely awkward witnessing a colleague behaving exactly like a street thug. The conflict peaked at a party. When Redford merely commented on the film's editing pace, De Niro suddenly launched into an uncontrolled string of obscenities. He not only insulted Redford as slow, but also brought up his sex life to humiliate him, implying, "You're weak from film to real life." The room was stunned. Redford's face flushed with shame. He then quietly left, ignoring the smug snicker of De Niro behind him. On set, De Niro's erratic temper further exhausted Redford. Colleagues recalled, De Niro could be silent all day, then suddenly fly into a rage over a small detail that didn't go his way. In those instances, Redford often became the sacrifice, the one publicly yelled at, despite the entire crew being present. What Redford absolutely could not tolerate was De Niro's unrestrained swearing habit. In everyday life backstage and even at international press conferences, De Niro would fire off heavy and vulgar curses. Redford was so shocked he complained to friends, "I don't want any event of mine to have him present." To Redford, De Niro was not just a difficult colleague, but a man who had repeatedly turned him into a joke, publicly insulting his honor. Therefore, in the list of names Redford absolutely did not want to see at his funeral, De Niro held a special place, a person who always carried curses like a stain he could never forget. If being publicly humiliated made Redford feel disgraced more bitterly, he also had to confront another face, and this was the man he never wanted at his funeral. 7. Michael Douglas, the moral degenerate who hit on other men's wives. Throughout his life, Robert Redford never felt such bone-deep hatred for anyone as he did for Michael Douglas. To Redford, Douglas was not only a sex addict, but a sick, brazen man who dared to hit on another man's wife. Douglas once publicly admitted to needing to roll in bed 5 times a day, even having to go to rehab. His tumultuous divorce from his first wife, Diana Douglas, further exposed undeniable scandals. Before that, he was famous for a string of romances with models and was sarcastically called the conquest addict by the press. The most bitter and unforgettable memory for Redford was when Douglas brazenly hit on his wife at a party. When Redford left the table to take a phone call, Douglas leaned toward his wife, whispered sweet words, and even placed his hand on her shoulder, causing her discomfort. A mutual friend quickly intervened. When Redford returned, he immediately sensed the strange atmosphere and nearly lunged to hit Douglas right in front of the crowd. Douglas's thoughtless remarks also infuriated Redford multiple times. When Douglas publicly implied that his throat cancer was related to oral activities, the press harshly criticized him as tactless, unintentionally hurting his own wife, Catherine Zeta-Jones. Redford viewed this as a prime example of irresponsibility and a habit of hurting others. Douglas was also known as an unyielding and autocratic man. In any project, he always wanted the final say. Colleagues frequently complained about being bullied by him, viewing him as a dictator, hiding behind a charming gentleman facade. Redford also experienced this when a co-production film turned into a disaster because Douglas insisted on revising the script to his own liking. From then on, the two officially became estranged, turning into public rivals in the media. In his final years, Redford cherished the simple but meaningful desire to establish a nature conservation fund. However, Douglas, also known for his social activities, publicly suspected him of profiting from fame. At an environmental conference when Redford was presenting his plan, Douglas suddenly stood up to object. "Don't turn conservation into a tool to polish your image." The entire audience was silent. Redford, who rarely lost his composure in public, just pressed his lips together and left the stage. That was a humiliation he never forgot. In one of his final diary entries, Redford wrote, "Douglas is not just a moral degenerate. He is a destroyer of all relationships, even the minimal respect between men. I never want to see his face at my funeral." If one man infuriated Redford with his brazenness and lack of morality, another annoyed him with his arrogance and self-aggrandizement. E8, George Clooney, believing he's number one, and turning the Oscars into a White House press briefing. For decades, Robert Redford and George Clooney were seen as the two pillars of Hollywood political cinema. But while Redford maintained a neutral image using Sundance to create creative space, Clooney turned politics into a tool to aggrandize himself. Clooney was famous for using every stage as a platform for speeches. At the Academy Awards, when other artists gave acceptance speeches, Clooney turned it into a peroration on foreign policy. This happened so often that the American press sarcastically remarked, "George Clooney turns the Oscars into a White House press briefing." Clooney didn't stop there. He often boasted about his meetings with heads of state. At any party, Clooney intentionally arrived a few minutes late to become the most noticed person. When he entered, he never went straight, but slowly stopped to shake hands exactly like a politician inspecting troops. At the dinner table, he would immediately spread exclusive anecdotes about dining with a European princess. Once at an award ceremony while the MC was introducing Robert Redford, Clooney suddenly stood up and left his seat, walking out amidst the flashing lights. His appearance immediately overshadowed the main subject. The next day's press wrote bitterly, "Even without winning an award, Clooney was still the biggest winner because he captured all the attention." The conflict peaked in 2010 at a symposium on energy policy in New York. Redford called for gentle dialogue seeking common ground between factions. Conversely, Clooney slammed the table, launching a direct attack in front of hundreds of guests. Things became so awful that the organization had to intervene, and Redford left without saying a word. The feud between the two was not limited to public forums, but also extended to philanthropy. While Redford had an environmental foundation, Clooney ran a human rights fund. When both competed for funding from a major corporation, Clooney won due to his stronger media appeal. Rumors suggested Clooney used every trick to sabotage Redford, making it very difficult for him to carry out environmental protection activities. Redford's family never let go of this resentment. They believed Clooney had used Redford's reputation to pave his way, then turned around and supported those who had attacked him. Therefore, if George Clooney appeared at Robert Redford's funeral, it would not be a tribute but a slap in the face to the family. It would be a painful testament that even in death, Redford could not escape the shadow of betrayal from someone once considered an ally. The day Robert Redford breathed his last Hollywood was choked with grief. A golden era officially closed. The press unanimously called him the last archetype of the classic movie star. But hidden behind the solemn tributes were still countless unanswered questions, conflicts, and unresolved indignation. Redford died at nearly 90 in his wooden villa in the Utah mountains where he had lived for decades. According to the initial statement, he passed away peacefully in his sleep. But many revealed details suggest the death was not as tranquil as people wanted to believe. In his final weeks, close friends recalled Redford was almost unrecognizable. The man who once captivated millions with Hollywood's golden smile was now a gaunt shadow with shallow breaths and weary eyes. He often sat for hours by the pinewood window, gazing out at the vast Utah mountains. Sometimes he quickly scribbled a few lines in an old notebook with shaky, fragmented handwriting. Relatives found scattered notes throughout the house carrying haunting messages. "Don't let them step into my funeral." This was not just a sign of a decaying body, but also the weight in his mind. Redford carried too many heart wounds from personal conflicts and the betrayal of friends to the obsession with honor and the image he had protected all his life. Redford did not die surrounded by his whole family as many other stars did. His children and grandchildren were present, but the distance between them had existed for years. The death of his eldest son in the 1950s always left a terrible void that no one could fill. His wife, Sybil Zagers, was by his side, but she herself confessed in an interview, "Robert never truly opened up to anyone. Even as he passed, I felt he held back a part of himself." The final diary entries revealed the truth. Redford chose a lonely way to leave the world, as if he didn't want anyone to see the moment the legend collapsed. One of the most shocking details was the list found in Redford's study. On it, he clearly wrote the names of 8 Hollywood stars he never wanted to see at his funeral. That list exploded like a bomb in the memorial sanctuary. It included names once considered close friends and colleagues: Jane Fonda, Dustin Hoffman, Tom Hanks, Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, George Clooney, Jeff Bridges, and Michael Douglas. Each name was a chapter of conflict, a psychological scar Redford carried to his death. Jane Fonda, who once turned him into an involuntary accomplice. Dustin Hoffman co-star turned enemy on set. Tom Hanks, the brazen idea thief. Brad Pitt, the spiritual child who turned his back. Leonardo DiCaprio, the hypocrite wearing the environmental advocate's cloak. George Clooney, the treacherous successor. Jeff Bridges, the filthy eyesore in Redford's view. And Michael Douglas, the degenerate who once hit on his wife. When this list was leaked, the media simultaneously headlined, "Redford's funeral who will be banned." All of Hollywood shuddered. Robert Redford's funeral took place in Utah in a serene mountain setting. People expected a ceremony full of respect and love. But instead, public opinion focused only on the ban list. Reporters surrounded the church, pointing their cameras to see who would arrive and who would not be allowed in. When Clooney sent flowers but did not appear, the press immediately analyzed every detail. When Pitt remained completely silent, many newspapers wrote that he didn't dare confront the memory of betrayal. Some guests recounted that inside the chapel, the atmosphere was heavy like a silent trial. Redford's image appeared on the large screen, but instead of applause, there was only silence, because everyone knew he passed away in bitterness, carrying a thick notebook of grudges. Robert Redford's death for many was not just the end of a film legend. It was also like an indictment of Hollywood, where the spotlight comes with betrayal, where friendship turns to hatred, and where even an icon has to pass away in solitude. He once wrote in an unpublished letter, "I lived for cinema, but cinema also made me lose so much. At the end of the road, I no longer want to share the frame with those who have insulted and betrayed me." Those words, when reread at the memorial service, left the entire hall silent. People not only mourned Redford, they also had to confront the truth that even Hollywood, with all its light, could become a darkness that consumed the most sensitive souls. Despite passing away in bitterness, no one denied that Robert Redford left a colossal legacy. He was the golden boy of the 1970s with the Sting, Butch Cassidy, and the Sundance Kid. He was the romantic lead in Out of Africa. He was the excellent director who won an Oscar for Ordinary People. And above all, he was the soul of the Sundance Film Festival, where thousands of independent filmmakers found their opportunity. Redford didn't just create films, he created a generation. He was not just an actor, he was a cultural icon. But his death reminded the world that behind an icon there are always wounds, grudges that are never healed. Robert Redford closed his life in the silence of the Utah mountains, but the echoes resounded like a warning bell. He was a brilliant star, but also a victim of the glamorous world he helped build. That death was not just a loss for Hollywood, but also a reminder that every light has a shadow. And for Redford, that shadow was too big, too cold, so that even when he passed, he still left behind taboos, blacklists, and a raw truth glamour can never redeem a lonely soul. People are often fascinated by the magnificent picture Hollywood skillfully paints, where camera flashes shimmer like lightning, where applause roars like a storm, and where bright smiles lead the world to believe happiness is eternal. But behind that dazzling stage, there is always a dense, dark region. Hidden beneath the velvet and vibrant bouquets are weary souls, silent cracks, and a loneliness so heavy it cannot be put into words. A legend is never born from peace. It is forged in long, sleepless nights in the moment. An artist quietly looks in the mirror after their makeup is smeared, or in a forced smile trying to hide a soul that is fragmenting. Those secrets were thought to be locked away forever behind dressing room doors, buried in archived files and polished rhetoric. But with just one old letter unintentionally revealed, one phrase slipping from the lips in a moment of weakness, the entire palace of glamour can turn to dust. And when the final mask is peeled away, what remains is not just the cold truth, but a haunting question: how much of that glory was real, and how much was just an illusion staged to conceal an abyss no one dared to look directly into.